little zookeepers, my name's Zoe and I'm a zookeeper. Today we're looking at the next part of the story of David. Before Ellie comes to tell us the story, why don't we recap? Well, Israel wanted a human king, even though God was their real king. But God gave them what they wanted. He chose a tall man called Saul to be their king. He started off as a great king. He listened to God and ruled his people well. But then he stopped listening to God and started to be a bad king. There needed to be a new king of Israel. Well, God chose a small shepherd boy called David. No one thought David could be king. He was too weak and small. But God can use anyone, even those who seem powerless and helpless. Do you remember God helped David to defeat the giant Goliath? Do you remember how David did that? With a catapult and a stone, because God was helping him. Well, King Saul didn't like that. He got really cross with David. He was jealous that everyone knew who David was and thought David was great. So he tried to kill David. That's not the right thing to do to God's chosen king, is it? Well, we also learnt that just like Saul rejected David, people reject Jesus, even though he's God's son and the true king. So what happens next? Does Saul catch David? Does he kill him? Ellie's going to tell us now.
Hi kids, today we're going to keep looking at David. Today's story is from 1 Samuel chapters 23 to 26. And it starts with Saul chasing David round a mountain, and he nearly catches him until he's called away back home to fight the Philistines. But he soon returns to chasing David, and he tracks him down to the desert of En-Gedi. Here, Saul stops for a quick toilet break in a cave. Little did he know that David's actually hiding with his men in the back of the same cave. David's men saw this as an opportunity to kill Saul. They'd caught him with his trousers down, literally. But David told them off, saying, "The Lord forbid that I should lift my hand against him, for he is anointed of the Lord." And instead he crept up to Saul and just cut off the corner of his robe. When Saul left the cave, David followed him, and he asked him, "Why do you listen when men say, 'David is bent on harming you'? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord gave you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift my hands against my master, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life." David proves to Saul that he doesn't intend to hurt him, even though Saul's trying to kill David. Saul then realizes he's done wrong by chasing David, and he says, "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just told me now of the good you did to me. The Lord gave me into your hands, but you did not kill me." And he hopes that David will forgive him. They then go their separate ways. But Saul doesn't leave David alone for long. He's soon back chasing and trying to kill him. He finds him in the desert of Ziph and sets up camp on the side of the road. David, with one of his men Abishai, sneaks into the camp at night when Saul and all his men are in a deep sleep that God had put them in. Abishai urges David to kill Saul, just as the men did when they were back in the cave. He says, "Today God has given your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice." But David again tells him off, saying, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" And instead they just take Saul's spear and water jug that were by his head. They leave the camp to a nearby hill, and David shouts to wake up Saul's army commander Abner, and he tells him off for letting someone get close enough to Saul that he could have killed him. When Saul realizes that David is there, David asks, like he did at the cave, why Saul is chasing him. He says, "What have I done? What wrong am I guilty of?" David had only ever served Saul, but Saul had rejected him and now wanted to kill him. But after David had finished speaking, Saul realized he was wrong, and he said, "I have sinned. Come back, David, my son. Because you considered my life precious today, I will not try to harm you again. Surely I have acted like a fool, and have erred greatly." Then David gives Saul his spear back, and he says, "As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble." David then leaves, and Saul goes back home. In this true story, David had two opportunities to kill Saul, but he listened to God and chose to obey him instead. He showed Saul incredible mercy. Do you know what the word mercy means? Maybe you could talk to someone you're with about what it means. I remember what the word mercy means by listening to a song called Grace Is.
Mercy is when God does not give us what we deserve. Mercy is when God does not give us what we deserve. He does it because He loves us. He does it because He loves us. Mercy is when God does not give us what we deserve.
It says that showing mercy is when you don't give someone what they deserve. Now, that might not sound like such a great thing, but let's look at the example in this story. Saul had been chasing David, trying to kill him, and David hadn't ever done anything wrong to Saul. In fact, he'd always served King Saul. So it would be fair to say that Saul deserved to be punished by David. But when David had the chance in the cave and when Saul was sleeping in the camp, he chose not to give Saul what he deserved. He chose not to punish him, but instead he let him go, showing mercy. Now that is a pretty impressive example of showing mercy, or being merciful, not punishing someone who's trying to kill you. Now David was an example of a king to point Israel to the perfect promised king that was coming, to show them what Jesus is like. So although David was incredibly merciful towards Saul, he definitely wasn't perfect. We see that lots of times in his life, and even in this story we see that he was tempted to listen to the people around him that were telling him to kill Saul, rather than to listen to God and obey him. For example, in the cave he does go up to Saul, and even though in the end he only cuts off the corner of his robe, he knows that even that was wrong. And it says in the Bible that he was conscience stricken. And he said, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed." But remember, David was only a signpost to the perfect king who was coming, to Jesus, who shows perfect mercy that's even more incredible than David's was. David had been innocent of doing anything wrong towards Saul, but Saul still wanted to kill him. Jesus is like David was, but he's even more innocent. In fact, he's perfectly, completely innocent. He's never done anything wrong. But we're like Saul. We've rejected Jesus. We don't listen to him. And because of us, because of our sin, he had to die. And yet Jesus chose not to give us the punishment we deserve because of our sin, like David chose not to punish Saul. Instead, Jesus showed us perfect mercy by taking that punishment on himself when he died on the cross in our place. Now, how does knowing you have a God that is so perfectly merciful, how does that make you feel? How does that make you want to respond? Maybe you can talk about that with someone you're with. It makes me want to praise God. It makes me want to thank God for that incredible mercy that he's shown me. And it makes me want to tell other people about what a merciful God I have, and that they can enjoy his mercy too if they trust in him. And it makes me want to be more like him, to show mercy like he does. I think learning how to be merciful is particularly important at the moment. Spending so much time at home and with the same people can mean we get annoyed or say things that are mean easily, or maybe the people around us do. So maybe next time your parents or siblings or friends in your bubble at school are annoying you, or maybe they're even being mean to you, you can remember the perfect mercy that Jesus shows you, and you can ask him to help you show mercy like that to the person that's being mean to you, rather than being mean back or getting angry at them. I challenge you and myself to ask God this week to help us to be like him by being merciful.
Thank you so much for that, Ellie. Isn't it great that Jesus has mercy on us by dying on the cross, even though we still sin and don't deserve it? Why don't you click on the link to listen to the song to remind you that mercy is when God does not give us what we deserve. Why don't you try and come up with some actions to the song to help you remember it? Why don't you go and do that now? Bye!